Before the regular meeting tonight, we have a budget hearing that is open to the public, so I wanted to go ahead and let Mr. Mann take over for the budget hearing.
Thank you, President Castine, members of the board, Dr. Lewis, members of the executive team. We have a pretty short budget set of information for our budget hearing tonight because typically what we would be doing, and we'd actually be doing it about a month later, is we'd be bringing back a budget revision based on adjusting our budget to align with whatever our more clear knowledge of what our budget picture looks like. But because we don't have that information from the state yet, this budget hearing is really to focus on the 1.06% teacher salary increase and the requirement that that budget hearing happen and that information be dealt with prior to November 1st. And so in order to do that, this was the last board meeting where we could accomplish that heavy hearing. So really, I've just got two quick slides for you. The first one showing what was originally in the original adopted budget. Now keep in mind the numbers that you see here, we're taking last year's teachers and assuming that they would all roll forward to this year. And so in fact, that doesn't happen every year. So the adjustment that had to be made was fairly complex because we had to take out any teachers that left us, but for any teachers who joined us, we had to determine whether they had eligibility. And if they had eligibility, we had to reach out to their district to get the number calculation. And so the new number is appropriately smaller than the original. You can see that bottom dollar amount of about $153,000 as opposed to the original $151,000. So that's really the only change we can make in the budget at this time. We will likely be coming back in December to make the other changes.
Okay. And at this point, I'd like to open up to the public if the public has any questions for Mr. Mann. All right. Seeing none, then we can go ahead and adjourn.
I have a question on the 1.6% increase. I have a comment if no one else does. Okay, it's not that I'm against giving the teachers a 1.6%. 06% increase. Any increase is great. I find two objections to this, not to the increase of 1.06. Governor Ducey in the last 2 years has given his state workers staff about 20% increase of the people who work with him. 20% versus 1.06 is really a sorry state. Second one is with this and the board having to give this with no question asked, is taking away local control. He is eroding our rights as a board, as members of our community. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
May I have a comment too?
Please.
So I know language is really important here. I might have missed this, but the language that they sell us as is a salary increase, but it's really more like a bonus. It doesn't carry forward. I just want to.
It's not put in the base M&O fund. It's a single separate once a year allocation by the state.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Once every year or once this year?
As long as they issue it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so any public comments? Questions? Okay. With that, I will go ahead and adjourn the budget hearing. And I will call to order tonight's regular board meeting. And I would like to ask Jim McKay to lead us in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let the record reflect that all governing board members are present, as are members of cabinet. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's board meeting and remind the audience of the request to address board cards that must be completed and submitted to the board secretary if they wish to speak to an agenda item. Board policy provides for 2 cards, white cards, to be submitted in order to speak to an agenda item, and blue cards to be submitted in order to speak during public comments. Policy also states there is a 5-minute maximum time limit per speaker. Due to the open meeting law, board members are not allowed to address items that are not on the agenda. If you do not want to address the board, but wish to give your comments in writing, you can do so on a goldenrod sheet, and all members will receive a copy. And that brings us to approval of agenda. Just pointing out too that it is kind of a meaty agenda tonight, so everybody could just be mindful of that.
Move the governing board approve the agenda as presented.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And now here we are with the adoption of the revised budgets.
Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Lewis, members of the executive team, as presented in the budget hearing, I'd like to put forth a recommendation for adoption of revision number 1 of the budget pursuant to the appropriate 3 Arizona revised statutes.
Move the governing board adopt the revised number 1 total aggregate school district budget for ARS 15-905 for fiscal year 2017-2018.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And now to C, adoption of the revised number 1.
Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Lewis, members of the executive team, the law requires that the 1.06 be a separate vote, the acceptance of those funds. And so that's why, even though there was only a single hearing, there's actually 2 separated votes to comply with those rules.
I move the governing board adopt the revised number 1.06% teacher salary increase per the requirements of laws 2017, Chapter 305, Section 33 for fiscal year 2017-2018.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Public comments, of which we have 1. So, Ms. Dorothy Green, Madam President, come on.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to take a couple minutes to share a couple anecdotal observations I've made in the last couple of weeks. One of the goals that I know that the board and our superintendent is working on includes customer service, improving and increasing our customer service for a wide variety of reasons. And I had the pleasure of being at our first community council meeting, and I love the idea that we gave surveys out to everyone that was in attendance, and I look forward to hearing the feedback on what we got from those surveys in terms of customer service and how we can improve that. And I just wanted to let you know that obviously over my 25 years working in the district, I've had great customer service relationships and phone calls and interactions with people at the district office, and then some that maybe weren't so great, but I want to focus on the positive, and there were a couple of different things that members of CEA as well as myself have noticed in the last couple of days, and I just wanted to acknowledge those. First one is we had a classified member who had a concern, and I referred him to our new person that's in charge of classified, Maria, right? Susan? Maria. And she responded very positively to the feedback that she got from Maria, and it was just a really good conversation that they had. Maria was super helpful and went above and beyond, in this member's opinion, to support her. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And then I had a meeting after school yesterday at Loma Linda, and it was interesting because as I was parking, a family was coming in, and it was mom, and it was dad, and it was a little boy, and dad had all these papers in his hand, and you could just tell they were coming to register, but it was like 3:40, maybe close to 3:45, and I was like, oh, they look really excited, and they're just gonna get turned away at the door. And I'm getting out my stuff, and I'm like, oh, that's too bad, but they'll come back tomorrow, and they'll register, and it'll be all good. And I was just so excited. I walked in the door, and there was their principal, Tracy, in Spanish, asking for acta de nacimiento and vacunas and all the different things and talking about all the paperwork. And it was clear that she had welcomed this family in. There were no other staff around, and she was registering them there and then. And it was just so heartwarming to see that kind of response from the educational leader at the school, really setting that example of customer service. She managed, without even skipping a beat, to buzz me in so I could get on campus to my meeting. And I just really think that that is just a shining example of what we're looking for in terms of customer service. And I wanted to share that with you guys and just encourage us to keep looking for those opportunities for not only the outside public to have good customer service, but employee to employee to be good customer service. So no matter who calls who, it's a really good and positive interaction, because I think that's really going to help build everything that we're looking for. Thank you.
All right, superintendent report.
Well, I just want to say we did have an amazing turnout at the community council, largest crowd we've ever had, and we have never run out of food, and we ran out of food. We had excellent feedback about what people were thinking relative to the A through F model, and we had excellent feedback regarding attributes of customer service, so I support everything that was just said. In terms of Saturday, I had the luxury of going to the Homestead Community Breakfast this Saturday in our park across the street from the district office. There were some creative artists, and people seemed very pleased that Mr. Mann and Dr. Peterson were also there, and we just built some really nice relationships. Thank you, Mrs. Young, for the invitation and the delicious food. The real motive. And then, because notice food came up twice. Okay, and then the third one was today I went to the National Charter School conference, which was held here in Phoenix, and it's a couple of days. I'm only able to attend today, and Mr. Zaragoza and I attended, and I learned a great deal just to kind of open up my thinking about their current journey as a variety of states are dealing with authorization practices and where they are in their development. And it kind of helped clear my head a little bit as we think about the innovations we want to consider, and I just appreciate being encouraged and invited to attend that. And I want to welcome everybody back from fall break. I hope everybody feels rejuvenated, and many thanks to the hardworking staff. I had the chance to paint with them. Where was I, at Creighton, Jim? And, you know, we don't stop. So anyway, welcome back, everybody.
Thank you. Governing board reports. Ms. Sexton Reeves, do you have anything?
Sure. I believe it was Friday past. I had the opportunity to walk around Creighton campus with Principal Ivan Carvajal and Superintendent Dr. Lewis. And we walked around the canal, we checked out the one walking bridge, and talked about plans for remodeling everything there. We actually walked around the neighborhood a little bit and were told about, you know, some of the incredible people in the neighborhood. It was really nice, a chance to find out a little bit more about what we're going to be doing in the future with that building. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Ms. Young?
Just a quick, with breakfast in the park at the Homesteads, the Homesteads are the longest running HOA in Phoenix. Even though we don't pay per se, it's volunteer paying. It's like $26 a year. But it was nice to have Creighton schools represented. Emily was there with a booth. Our local school is LCK, and there was some kids running around that have started LCK and Head Start there. And it was nice since I've been on the board. Dr. Peterson and Jay have been coming for the last 3 years. This is the third year. This is Dr. Lewis's first year. It was nice to have, since we're on the park, the Creighton District Park, and that's where we hold it. It was nice to have the Creighton School District represented there. The people really like the neighbors and all for them to come also. I've gotten a bunch of positive feedback from them being representing the school district and coming to the breakfast. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Young. Mr. Zaragoza?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. So I think you might have heard from Superintendent that you get ready for the rumors, that we should dare to dream big. And so for me, what that meant is let's check out what some other folks are doing, other systems, school systems leaders across the country. So Dr. Lewis and I attended just one day of the National Association for Charter School Authorizers, I think is their title. And it was great. These were, even though we were a non-charter entity and a non-authorizer, I felt we were very welcome. One of our sessions was entitled Monitoring Board Accountability for High Quality Schools. It was a governing accountability session, something we've talked about, and there were a lot of, I think, good practices that they were sharing, and we actually were able to share our models with the folks from Maine, and they're really excited to see how that folds into their work. The other big session we attended was, I think they called it Authorizing for the Whole, and this was about how they balance their portfolios when you have certain schools that are higher performing than others, how you make decisions and balance the whole thing. And to me, it was perfectly applicable to what we're doing. One thing that I took away was governing matters, and we're doing a good job. And also that there are maybe some more opportunities to rethink and reinvest our community more deeply in the future of our schools. New ways to create ownership of our schools, and like I started this with, like, to get ready for rumors, we're daring to dream, and it was just an exciting and I think appropriate professional development day today.
Sounds great. Ms. Neshefri?
I do not.
Nor do I. All right. All right, well then that will take us to consent agenda items.
I move the governing board approve consent A through F in accordance with policy BEBB-R.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Interesting that our consent agenda was A through F, and now we're going to be discussing the A through F letter grades for Creighton schools. Coincidence?
Good job preparing the agenda.
Well, good evening. Dr. Dupin and I are going to do our best to provide a concise presentation due to the meatiness of the meeting tonight, but we hope that it will provide some insight, allow for some discussion, and have us look at where we're at and where we want to go. So each of you received earlier a PowerPoint presentation that had the individual school summaries. There are brief summaries, as well as then you were provided the actual profile that we received as a district from each of the schools. Also in the presentation that was sent to you earlier had some school comparisons. What I want to talk about just real briefly about the school comparisons. So as we are trying to think outside of the box and stretch ourselves as well, we did a little bit of stretching with the schools that we did some comparisons with as well. We looked at demographics, we looked at similarities with some of the programming that was at the school. But for an example, as we know that Monte Vista is just beginning their exploration with performing arts. The school that we had in their comparison has more years with that. We also looked at some K-5 schools. We looked at some 6-8 models, and we included those in well, just so that we were trying to just take an overview of some of the surrounding area schools, so we can just have some more information to have dialogue about. So we want to start with is just a real quick overview of what consisted of the model. So what we know is that 30% of the model was the proficiency rate off of the Easy Merit, and that's purely off of the ELA and the math components. In looking at our full academic year students. So that's the piece for that. So for growth actually took up 50% of the formula that they utilize, and that 50% is broken into 2 sections. And each of those sections were worth 25%, and that was in the proficiency growth of the students, as well as the student growth target rate. And we're going to break that down a little bit more as we go on. Then as a means to be taking a look at school from a little bit more of a holistic piece, they added 10% in there under the acceleration and readiness components. And that includes looking at the decrease in the percentage in 3rd grade in the minimally proficient area for ELA, a decrease in chronic absenteeism, looking at subgroups performance, which was an interesting piece for us because the N count for any subgroup has to be at least 20 students, and that was a piece that we needed to look at for some of our schools. Some of our schools didn't have an N count of 20. And then looking at the increase of special education inclusion. That was pretty quick. Any questions on that piece?
Explain special ed inclusion, what does that look like?
Sure, we'll take a look at that a little bit later, but what that looks at is the percentage of students who have special education identification, that they are receiving 80% or more of their instruction within the Gen Ed classroom. And there's a percentage ratio that we'll look at as we go through.
So synonym for mainstream.
In the general ed classroom. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other question? Okay. So our next one is just going to be a real quick overview of what the total percentage for our different schools and where they landed as far as the letter grades, and they're pretty self-explanatory. So we're looking at Biltmore receiving an A at 83%. You can see that they were just shy of 3 points of being in an A. We have Monte Vista, Excelencia, Mackin, Loma Linda, and LCK, who all fell within the range of letter grade of a C. And then we have Papago, Creighton, and Gateway that fell in the letter range of a D. And now we're going to break them apart a little bit. So if we look at proficiency, the proficiency has a possibility of 30 total points. And this is based off of our FAE students. So these are students who we could qualify in 2 ways. One, either our FAY1 students, so they're students who are 1 year that were here the whole school year with us, as well as the other possibility was the full academic years 1, 2, and 3 students. So as they calculated the scores, it depended on which provided the higher percentage points, and then that was what was given. So if we look at where our schools are at, Monte Vista was the only school that actually where they looked at all 3 FAE years. Everybody else was calculated off of FAE 1.
So why do they do that? How do they choose?
So the purpose of that is to be able to provide 2 opportunities to be looked at to be able to gain the most points.
Okay.
So what that means is that our other 8 schools had a higher point percentage in their FAY 1 year kids.
Okay.
And it was so close with Monte Vista, it was 0.08 of a point between the 2. So it was but it allowed them to use that as their higher percentage. So that's the purpose. So again, looking at different ways that they can allow schools to earn those percentage points.
Dr. Peterson, will you just repeat that vocabulary again? FAE?
Sure. FAY stands for full academic year. So they looked at either students who were at 1 year or the other one was year 1, year 2, year 3, that the kids have been with us for a full academic year.
Okay, and just to repeat what I think you said, Monte Vista was the only one, FAE 3.
Where they used all 3 years. The other ones were based off of FAY 1.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions with that? Okay. So one of the things that to note is that in looking at how the proficiency points were garnered is that for students who were at highly proficient, they earned a 1.3 point, proficiency 1, partially proficient 0.06, and if the child was in minimally proficient, they received 0 points. So that's how the weighted component comes into the total of the points that they received. So if we look at Biltmore for an example, and we go back to, I don't know if you remember, but when we shared with you the actual AZ Merit percentages for each one of them. So if we look at Biltmore's AZ Merit report, their overall, just for example, for third grade, was they had 27% of their kids in HPs, which is the highly proficient. So all of those kids that would have been in the highly proficient area got the highest amount of points possible. That makes sense? Okay. And the other interesting piece that you'll see later on is that if we have, Gateway had 60% of their students that were in the minimally proficient, but yet, Mackin had a large percentage of their students that were minimally proficient, but they had the most growth. So we'll actually see where that growth component comes into play. So we take a look at growth. So there's two possible points, areas for growth. One is in the student growth percentile, which actually is what was a child's growth in comparison to their peers. And then the student growth target really actually takes each individual child, and there's a target growth area in which the students are to move towards in order to reach their proficiency level. And so we have, here's that targeted growth, and then here's the actual child's growth level. So what that is that what's that comparison of that child's individual growth to the projected growth profile that's been designed for that child. So if we're looking at the growth percentile, it's taking the newest test score, so last spring's, and compared it to the one before, so SY15, so the spring of 15 compared to the SY16, and then what was that student's growth direction in comparison to where they were to grow. And so that's where the points come for the student growth percentile. And this is actually both of them, both the student growth percentile and the student growth target are broken into two sections. So there's a 12.5% in points in English, 12.5 in math, and the same thing for the student growth target. So those are compared together. So, and again, looking at the highly proficient, the proficient, and the partially proficient, and the minimally proficient. So I'm going to show Excelencia's profile that you guys, everybody received, so we can kind of look at that a little bit more. Bear with us while we switch here. It might be easier for you to see if you can slide to, I think it's slide 46. So again, this is where you see where it says prior year, highly proficient, prior year proficient, and so forth down in each section. That is the score for the spring of 15. And then the current year, that was spring of 17 that we had last year. So we're comparing 15, 16, and 16, 17 school years. So if we're looking at the current year low growth, we have 25%, 0.25, not 25%, 0.25 of their students are registering in their low growth. We have, and under the average growth, we have almost a 1%. So then the current year high growth would be those two to put together, which is a 1.23%. And so as we look at each one of these, and I know this is really fast and it's complicated as we're going through it, but where this brings value is for us as we're looking at our individual students and determining where our kids are in those categories, and then beginning to monitor where their growth is. Dr. Dupin, what do you think?
I think simply one of the lessons that, or one of the pieces of valuable information that we get from this is just by looking at and seeing when we're comparing the student growth percentiles, which are the top two boxes, to the student growth to target, you'll notice that the total points, like in the bottom left-hand corner, student growth to target, there is 6.36 total weighted points. Student growth to target math points is 7.10. That's a lot lower than the points for student growth percentiles. What this tells us really illustrates that a trend that we see play out across all of our schools, which is that on growth percentiles, our kids do grow. On growth to target, which is a grade level target, a target that is established statistically to get a kid to proficiency in 3 years, that's where our students, the majority, are growing more slowly. So that's a piece for us to do.
And is this measuring just 1 year of growth to target?
It is measured on an annual basis.
Okay.
But the target is actually at a 3-year span.
Right. So how would that, so when they reach the 3 years, they're supposed to be at a specific, so will that be more accurate, do you think? Because they should know whether or not they actually reached the target?
You mean when this has been in place for 3
Yeah.
years?
Mhm.
That would be the goal. And the goal for us is to really take this information and really be watching those kids and their targeted growth so that we can get them at that level. And then what do we need to do as interventions to along the way to help them get to that targeted growth within that 3-year span? Other questions? So if we go back to the slide that has the growth points on it. So what we'll see is that as we look at the student growth percentile, which is the students' growth in comparison to their peers, we can see that both Mackin and LCK have the strongest growth percentile in that area, which means their kids really, in comparison to peers at their same level, had a higher growth. But then also too, as we look at the student growth targets, then we can see that they still have a ways further to go in their actual growth. Do you see the difference between the two? Questions on that? So awesome that they had that growth and the need for us to continue to support watching where the students are at in that targeted band so we can make sure that we're trying to help them catch up. Okay?
I have a question, I guess.
Yes.
So because we're 3 years out from the target, just how is it determined if they're on the right path based on this?
So one of the things that we have worked with ATI is the correlation of our benchmark assessments with AZ Merit. And what we're finding is that there's an 80 to 85% correlation with our benchmark assessments to what we determine and see on our AZ Merit. So as we're getting ready to take our first round of benchmarks, the end of October, we'll be coming back in November to share that information. And then so what we know is that as we look at our pretest versus our benchmark assessments, we'll be able to see the path in which each child is moving towards. And the schools will receive data spreadsheets that will help them with that. And then it's, okay, so here, what are the standards that they missed, they had covered, so we know that we need to go back and hit the ones where kids still have gaps, so that then we can keep moving forward. Then in January again, then we'll have another benchmark again, which will then help us take a look at what's the direction, and then respond with interventions for those kids as they're moving forward.
So as we move deeper into the pie, this is the section that starts to examine other sources of data. So the English language learner points possible are derived from our Zella and our student scores. So we can see what our students were able to garner points for their schools. And this is divided again into two pieces. There are points awarded for students who are growing, meaning moving from one level of proficiency to another. Each child gets so many points. And then how many students are actually reaching the level of proficiency established for the assessment, with higher levels of proficiency earning again more points. So this is good because it does highlight for us those areas where we can do increased work around the scores and the proficiency levels of our English learners.
Is one piece that I'd like to say is we still kind of have a little mystery here, because this is in comparison to the states, and we don't know what that is yet. So that hopefully will come in the future.
Is there a certain percentage of English language learners that reach proficiency to get a 5 points? Is it graduated on a percentage, or how does the state decide who's a 4 and who's a 3 or who's a 5?
So it is compared, our individual students are compared to a state average, which is what Dr. Peterson was referencing, we don't have access to. But they take all of our students and then compare them using standard deviations in order to award more points to kids who are closer or who are
So it's not
meeting
even
that
a
average.
percentage, something cut and dried like percentage that reach proficiency that start off on an English language learner program. It's against the state, so.
So very often, like, we would have a percentage of reclassification is what we've talked about, and so we might see 23%, 26%. So we get our rate of reclassification. We also get our rate percentage of students who go up a level each year on a Zella. But what we no longer receive is the state level value for that. So I don't know how many of Arizona's students reclassified last year.
One piece that we do know, though, is where you see a point of 4 points. That means that they were only a half a point standard deviation away, and if they had a 3, then they were 1 point away from the states.
Mystery to us. Okay. Thank you.
So another piece of the pie is the acceleration and readiness section, where schools can earn up to 10 additional points. And this is another place where metrics, other data sources other than AZ Merit can be used, although AZ Merit can play a role. Those acceleration or readiness measures include the possibility of decreasing grade 3 minimally proficient students, decreasing chronic absenteeism, improving subgroup performance, and the inclusion of special education students. So what's interesting about this is that schools can earn up to 15 points. If you add up across the top column the total points possible for each type of acceleration readiness indicator, but we can only 10 of those points can count. So you can earn up to 15, only 10 count. And when we analyze the results of our schools, 5 of 9 of our schools did earn all 10 of the possible points. 3 of 9 of our schools earned 8, and 1 of our schools earned 6. So by breaking this down and looking, we can identify schools in which we can provide additional focus around that move online reading or decreasing the minimally proficient students in 3rd grade reading. Also, we know by name who our chronic absenteeism students are. We can work with those. Those are opportunities to gain back some of those points. The final column on the right is for the inclusion of special education students. And these points are awarded for having 7% or greater of your special education population mainstreamed. And this is designed to encourage mainstreaming of students. And it is also an opportunity for us to analyze how our students are receiving services in those schools where 0 points were awarded there. and also to ensure that students are coded properly.
So question, the end of course math testing, is that just for high schools?
It actually could be for us as well.
Okay,
So if
okay.
we had students in, or as we work toward having students in actual algebra, for example, courses, if they were taking the end of course AZ Merit assessment, we could have students participate.
Okay.
What I'm actually not sure about, and I want to research, is just whether or not that would fit in our model as far as awarding a safe lab.
Right.
I know it's possible and we
Right.
can do it, but whether or not it fits into this model, I'm not
Right.
sure. We'll follow up. The final area where additional points can be earned are for what they call special education bonus points. And this again is designed to reward schools for not under-identifying special education students. So you have to have, Dr. Peterson talked about an N or a number of students at or greater than 20 in order to be eligible for these points. So if we have that number of students and we are greater than or equal to 80% of the state's percentage of students who are enrolled in special education, we can receive these bonus points. So a number of our schools did receive those points. So another opportunity to validate the coding of our student services.
The other piece too is that's allowed us to have discussion as to why the schools who didn't receive those points. So for example, we know that Excellencia has had some challenges with the turnover with psychs on their campuses, and so we haven't had a study of the solid team there as far as testing kids. We know Biltmore didn't have the actual end number, so it's allowed us to do some more digging as to figure out what those pieces really mean. And then what is it then that we're going to do?
Yeah.
So this just quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but these are examples of the kind of analysis artifacts that we're using. This is an example of how we look at student achievement data and highlight students who are within a 10% range of either increasing, moving to the next proficiency level on AZ Merit, or those who are in danger of moving down. So this is kind of the first, the lip of the funnel, if you will, as we drill down to try to identify and work with those students who need additional support in order to have an academic breakthrough. So for example, the red arrows, just looking at students 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, they have those red arrows. That means that those students are all within 10%. Their score right there, that's within 10% of the cut score for minimally proficient, which is the red zone down there for students 9 through 12. So it's important for our teachers to know that students 4 through 8 are at risk of falling below the cut score for their current grade level. They have to keep them there or move them up.
So each school has this data available for all of their students.
And this is a piece that, we don't have to wait. We talked about waiting for the state to give us labels to know what to do. We've had this data since June. We've been actively working with this data since we received it. So this is just another example of how of a kind of data conversation that happens on our campuses, where teachers examine and look at each student's performance level indicator, and they can know how many and who by name the children are who are at risk of falling down or who are ready to move up to the next proficiency level. Now with AZ Merit, we did recently receive what they call a static file, a giant spreadsheet with thousands and thousands of lines of data. And we've gone through this and begun to analyze who our students are who have high growth, what their growth percentile levels are, and what their growth targets are. Because a natural question is, well, what are we going to do with this information? So this analysis lets us sort of pinpoint where children are who have high growth percentiles, they grow, but they're just below or at or near their target. So those are students who are ready for a breakthrough. And then using our benchmark information, we can further drill down to those specific standards, and that's where teachers can especially take action.
So as you can see, we have a lot of data that we're looking at. There's a lot of information here that actually takes it to the individual student level, which is really, really important. And I would now like to open up for questions and discussion from board members.
It's been said you can't be right all the time. Well, some people can't be wrong all the time, and this is not about Creighton. It's about one of our state senators, Sylvia Allen, who is part owner of a charter school who received an F. And she made some interesting comments in the paper about the grading system of the state. Oh, besides that, she's also the head of the Senate Education Committee. Yeah. And she believes a bunch of things that I don't believe in. She spouts conspiracy theories and other things. But her school said, received an F, and she said it's, I have grandchildren, and I personally see the help that is given to my children. It's not an F school. And she believes, this charter school reinforces good character traits like honesty and the willingness to recognize the difference between opinion and fact, this conspiracy monger. But anyway, there's been quite a few articles about her in the paper lately, and basically she visited the school and says the school, the kids are learning. It's an all-encompassing environment. The kids are safe. And this is one thing where I think she's not off in left field, that while the numbers and the letter grades give us some information, it's not everything. It's not the school's environment, it's not the school, how they're teaching the kids. Besides, the language arts and math, they're teaching them other things. I mean, you go to any of our schools, and they have the thing, in various classrooms. These are the rules of the classrooms. And they're usually rules that everyone should live by. And I just think it's funny that one of our state senators is now having fits about the letter grades since her charter school ran out.
I mean, the formula is set by the state board, not by the legislature.
Right.
But I think my comment will be, number one, thanks for analyzing and sharing and teaching us about the formula that they use to come up with the letter. I find the most compelling thing that you shared is we've had this data, we didn't need to wait for the letter to tell us what to do with that we've had this, and you have the students, and you know where each of the students are. And I'll also just, I don't know, I think something that Michelle Berg said at our study session is, I think she said the data is, I'm going to say the data are, it's data, and it's only useful when we put it in the context. So thanks for doing this analysis and helping us understand the complicated formula.
It's complicated. I think that the thing for us is we're having conversations with school and within the Ed Service team and the executive level is just what this shows us is the importance of continuing to differentiate our support to the schools. So we have schools we have 9 different schools. We have some similarities, but we have lots of differences as well. And what's important now is we continue to try and just really bear down and determine the differences, the different levels of support. So we've got some schools who are receiving additional ILT meetings on top of the one where all of the TOAs come together. We've got our special education team that are going out to certain schools providing some additional support. So we're really tiering our instructional support and our educational services support and working with the schools to help make the most impact that we possibly can by working together side by side to help each one of our kids be the best that they can be. So.
I'm just curious, I have a question on the school comparisons. I thought that part was interesting. How, as far as similar demographics and similar programming, how did you determine that?
So demographics wise, we were looking at free and reduced rates, we were looking at just ethnic demographics, and as far as programs, because we're at a new level with that, there really wasn't an honest compare piece. But also too, we had between our discussions, principal input, just as different. Can you check this one? Can you check this one? So again, it's not a apple to apple,
Okay.
But it's a starting place for us to start looking at things.
Helpful, I think.
Oh, sorry, so
Fancy.
Must be important.
It's like our intro music.
Okay, I did attend a workshop put on by the State Department of Education at the Leadership Conference in Flagstaff in June that explained the whole breakdown, so I was kind of familiar already with it. I'm looking at the comparisons as well to different schools, and I'm noticing we've got some charter schools in there. And I do want to point out that some of the charter schools, not all of them, some of them, especially the ones that have been around a while, some of them pick and choose their students. And so we as a public district school do not pick and choose our students. We get the kids that walk through the door that live in our district. And even outside too, when we do open enrollment. So sometimes that skews the grading of the charter schools because they're not having the students as ours.
I had just another question today on NPR or KJAZ. Actually, they were saying that we're going to start from scratch again, or with the A to F.
Oh dear Lord.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. And what I've heard is that the growth percentage will be going down because that's the complaints that they're getting. I guess the most complaints right now.
Yeah.
And so I just, yeah.
Yeah, right now you have bases appealing their marks because with bases being so high performing, and that's all the kids live for, is at school. The growth is not there if you're at the top to begin with.
In the past, the embargoed period was the preliminary period, so that there were either substantive or statistical appeals to the letter grade that was issued, and that was why such an embargo existed. The media pressured some of the school districts to release their letter grades prior to the embargo being lifted, citing that an embargo is not an appropriate time frame. It's been interesting that the state board has introduced the language that these are preliminary results, which is new language to school districts who've been honoring the embargo as such. The state board just announced in a press release today that they're going to continue with the process to review the A through F accountability plan, and they are seeking public feedback
in two forms. One, they have an electronic survey online, which you'll probably receive from the Arizona School Board Association, but I'll forward it to any and all of our community members who would like it. And they're going to host 5 open house meetings, 4 of them in October, beginning at 9 o'clock on Jefferson Street at the State Department, October 24, 27, 30, and 31, Halloween. The 5th one will be November 6th at 5 p.m., same place. So they'll have 5 open houses and an electronic survey for continued review of the plan that I think many people have taken a good 6-8 months to learn, apply, study, debate. And I have a great deal of empathy for the State Department because there's a lot of no-win in this conversation because of the ceiling effect. And the second reason is because of the fixed notion of what a grade level means. If we were to truly measure growth, and we had a 5th grader who was reading at the 1st grade level and made progress to become a 3rd grade type reader, that's 2 years worth of growth. If a school has a 5th grader who's reading at the 7th grade level and they move to the 9th grade level, that's 2 years worth of growth. If we could begin to really assess children in terms of their growth, and rather than try to force it around what a typical 5th grader does, I think the state would find a greater understanding of the incredible work that the schools and the teachers are doing with children. And that will be the feedback I will provide them at an open house and on a survey. Secondly, I'd like to mention that the feeder schools to Phoenix Union High School District are working in an organization we call Thriving Together, and we are beginning to share data points and data sets so that we can look at each other in a similar fashion. And we have hired, as a team, some statisticians to put together a more comprehensive dashboard, and we are in the beginning stages of aligning our criteria for school effectiveness. I see a lot of hope here, and I see it very localized, and I'm very proud and excited about what Thriving Together has begun. It will take some time, and it'll be probably crude to start with, but we'll get better at it.
I think on that note, I think it's just important that that we do advocate for the growth part of it, because I think if that changes, it's not going to be any better for the letter grades, And I mean, in my 2 cents, I actually think the fact that all these high achieving schools got B's all of a sudden is an okay thing. I mean, there is always room for improvement. This is Arizona. There's always room for improvement. And, I'm okay with my kid being at a school where, we're not in denial that there's not room for improvement. But I think the squeaky wheel, is always the one that gets what they want. So I think it's important that we advocate for the growth part of this.
Bigger than this is a reformulation of data, right? And I think that's actually less important. What's more important is a governing board and as a governing team, as a community, we decide what we want for our kids. And we use data to measure how we're doing. So I personally, I guess, less invested in the state's plan to measure schools and more invested in our local plan to measure and tell our own story. So I'm excited to see what Thriving Together comes up with. I'm more interested in what Creighton comes up with, and us working with Emily to market that.
Everybody really covered just about everything that I was thinking, so thank you so much for putting it in a way that we could all kind of dissect it and understand it. And thank you, to echo Carl, for being proactive, knowing that these grades were coming out and not knowing exactly what it was going to look like. But you guys, again, going back to local control, had already started
Schools
to
have been
figure
very
out,
busy at
figure
work.
out, be proactive and work on a plan. So thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to approve the job description and salary schedule for Director of Facilities and Transportation.
Only 4 slides. So, good evening, Madam President, Governing Board,
Superintendent Lewis and Cabinet. We are here this evening to talk about a proposal for a reorganization of the Transportation and Facilities Department based on a current vacancy and upcoming vacancy in order to become more efficient and more cost effective. So I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Mann to share a little bit about the details to the reorganization. You'll find the attached job descriptions, effective and salary schedules in your packet.
So if you look at the proposed organization chart, it really shows what the shift would be. Functionally, the important thing is to still have oversight of the two departments and have day-to-day function. So there would be a shift to take two existing positions and move them up to a manager level to provide some of that support while that director would be supporting both of those facilities. One of the things that is advantageous in this is we're looking at different models. Some of the things that we've brought to the board, like over the summer, we had transportation staff working with child nutrition and wellness to have buses going into the neighborhoods feeding children. So one of our goals is to find more of those synergies. Where can we leverage our staff across a broader range to not only create efficiencies, but maybe create broader opportunities for staff members to make those positions of jobs more attractive as we move into a tighter market to attract individuals. This actually is a model that would provide us with savings. As we looked at neighboring districts, we do find that a lot of districts of our size do have a combination director for both of these positions. When you typically put those together, it is a slightly higher paying position, and there are some additional costs with those managerial shifts, but by combining the two positions into one, the net savings across all of those changes is approximately $55,000. So it also provides us with a cost savings benefit from a budget perspective. And so, and the last piece is obviously our current salary schedule. It doesn't include this position, it includes the two separate positions. So on the docket for this recommendation is also a recommendation to adopt an adjusted schedule that includes the combined position. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board?
I move the governing board approve the job description and salary schedule for Director of Facilities and Transportation and job descriptions for Manager of Facilities and Transportation effective immediately.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, thank you. So this takes us to 9A, update on the use of bond override and Proposition 123 proceeds.
Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Lewis, members of the executive team, I'd like to bring up our Director of Finance, Dina Dumoulin, so that way we can give you a quick walkthrough here. This is a statutorily required reported. Now what you will find is transparency has been one of the hallmarks of the governing board in our time here. So in keeping with that tradition that's important to Creighton, we've also included the use of Proposition 123 funds because it's another funding source that we've been kind of tracking how those dollars are spent. We get a lot of questions about, well, how did you use those monies? And so this is really 4 presentations in one. It's use of bond funds, it's use of capital funds, it's use of maintenance and operations override funds, and in addition to that, those Proposition 123 funds. One of the things I wanted to point out before we dive into it is that as we look at bond and capital override funds, the expenditures that you'll see are broken out by school. So we're not going to spend a lot of time delving into each school. What we're going to be doing is going through some of the trends and highlights and what things might be different or unique, but we're certainly open to answer any questions you might have. And Mr. Jim McVeigh, who's our Director of Bond Projects, is here. So if there's a question about a specific project, we do have him available as well. And then really I think the most important piece is we've got some summary components that do comparisons so that we have a sense of why this information is important. So we'll start off with bond proceeds.
So we had a 40-40, I've been watching the ball stacks back here. So 44 million bond authorization passed in 2009. The district needed to sell those bonds within 6 years, and we needed to spend 85% of those funds in 3 years after the sale of each bond. And we complied with all of that. So very quickly going through everything, playground equipment and flooring at Creighton. I will say that at Creighton, once we learned that the bond passed and Creighton would be the school we rebuild, we removed some projects and reallocated those, so you'll see some lower numbers for them. Gateway School, fencing, parking lot, shade nets, exterior painting, and water tank replacement there.
What, a water tank, I'm kind of wondering, when I think of a water tank, I think of those big things on stilts. What exactly is that, do you know?
It's a secondary tank for the water heater.
Oh,
So
okay,
it adds capacity for the water heater for the kitchen.
that makes sense. I'm just, yeah, hot water heater.
We had one of those in our backyard, the big
Yeah.
tanks.
Yeah, hot water heater tank.
And I have a question, fencing, weren't all the schools have new fencing like a couple of years ago?
We still had quite a bit of fencing that was chain link, and so this is
Okay.
continuing the project to replace that with the nicer looking wrought iron.
Okay.
They call it no climb fencing, I call chain link easy climb fencing, but it does upgrade the look, and we're obviously
Yeah.
trying to have curb appeal.
Right.
So.
At Mackin, you see carpet and painting for the classrooms. There was a multi-purpose room recarpeted, an outdoor heating pump. We had some concrete work there. And we had some playground equipment that needed to be replaced. Monte Vista, we're back to the fencing again. Pacaville, same thing. Biltmore, we did some classroom carpeting. We did some playground equipment replacement. It was a safety issue. We did some security cameras to highlight an area of the playground that was, out of the view of other security cameras, so we put those in. Excellencia, again, carpet and painting for classrooms. We also did a section of the exterior painting and an exit door security upgrade. That's kind of a crash bar and alarm for an exit door there. District-wide project management, that's a portion of what was Mr. Sukanik's, now Mr. McVeigh's salary, which is allowable in bond to oversee these projects. Architectural services, fire access control panel, and then some flooring at the district office south, and some bond fees are included in there as well.
So this is a very difficult chart to read because it's the big 2011 to 2017. Keep in mind we're talking about the historical bond, so this is the bond we're closing out, not the one that we sold funds for at the tail end of last year, because we haven't really spent out of that new bond yet. So if you look at the lower right-hand corner, really the big picture is a total expenditure of just over $43 million. There's a few dollars left there that are still being closed out this fiscal year, and you can kind of see the totals by school site. Where you're going to see the really big numbers is at Monte Vista and Pacaville, because those were the total school rebuilds.
Here's our projected projects for fiscal year 18. Keep in mind that these are the ones we actually have quotes for, and we have projects in the works. We may have emergency projects that come up. We may, Creighton may advance a little bit quicker on construction, so we may have something open up there. But that's what we anticipate spending out of bond this year.
We may have the opposite effect with some projects, where sometimes they don't get finished and we're not billed by June 30th, so then sometimes those will roll over to the next fiscal year. So as we shift gears to capital override, any questions on what we've covered with bond? So capital override is going to be very similar to bond. It's just a different capital funding source, and so they're different types of projects.
I have a question for you, so back to the 2018 projected. When is that, this obviously doesn't include rebuilding Creighton, like when is that projected?
Right, it includes a portion of those costs, so
Okay.
those dollars are spread out over time, so there will be some costs that are incurred this fiscal year,
Okay.
but the lion's share of those costs will be incurred over the following 2 fiscal years as that phased construction takes place on that campus, as opposed to Biltmore, where you see the larger number. Even though that project in its full scope isn't larger. The project may be completed within the fiscal year 2018. We're not going to rush any of these projects. We're going to do them right. So it's possible that we'll actually push into fiscal year 19 for closing.
Okay. And then just curious about the security cameras at Biltmore, like is that for actual security or is it to help watch kids out of sight? That just seems like a large amount of money for security cameras. I'm just wondering what the purpose.
Yeah, it's to cover a portion of the campus where we didn't have visibility.
Like for after hours?
It's typically used for after hours. It is occasionally used during the school day, but it's not like someone's watching it all the time.
Right.
It's used after the fact sometimes to figure out like what actually occurred.
Right,
If we had, say we had a trip and an injury, it gives us the ability to see what actually happened.
And do we have security cameras at all schools for that purpose?
Yes, we do,
Okay.
yeah. And it's not uncommon for us to fill blind spots if we discover them. We also do replacements as they age and fail.
Okay.
And they are far more expensive than you'd like them to be. It just happens to be an expensive item to have an outdoor rated camera
Right.
that's capable of running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years.
Right.
So here we start at Creighton. We had no projects there last year due to the rebuild coming up. Gateway, you can see that we had the energy management system for AC control installed. We're replacing sinks, faucets, drinking fountains. Schools got some new radios for their communication. The parking lot channelizer, those are those little things you drive around and try to miss. And then we demoed a block wall by the restroom, and I believe that was for safety reasons as well. There were some incidents behind that wall, kids being out of sight, so. Larry C. Kennedy, picnic tables in the amphitheater out there, and some student chairs and desks. That'll be a common theme. Loma Linda, you can see same thing. Mackin, they had some cabinets with locks for their after-school STEM supplies. NPR furniture, library furniture and equipment. We replaced the bleachers. There was countertops in some restrooms that were replaced, and then drinking fountains were campus-wide for this project. Monte Vista, none. Papago, you'll see the furniture there for students again. The washing machine in the nurse's office went out. The safe was needed. There was some lighting added to the exterior of buildings A and B that were a little dark when the kids came in for morning before school. An upgrade to the EMS system. We purchased some portable walls as they grew. We needed some wall dividers to divide classrooms and give some of the OT, PT type folks some space. And then some bookshelves for the BE classroom. Moving to Biltmore, they replaced their large stage curtain, again with office radios and some flooring in the nurse's office and the restroom there. And at Excellencia, we did a playground replacement there, an upgrade to one of the equipment. Here's where the largest portion is. These are our district-wide expenses. So you'll see the first two are the student laptops and the student iPads. That was for the district initiative to get technology in the hands of the students. The copier lease, the software licenses there include both instructional softwares as well as things like our HR finance software system, any of our testing softwares, computer replacements for teachers, other staff computer replacements, and then your miscellaneous classroom technology are things like Proxima printers, things like that. And then curriculum was the K-5 curriculum, and then band instruments in there as well. Here's our projected numbers for this year, and see.
I think the big thing that you'll see repeated throughout here is you see the large technology dollar amount, and that's because in order to do all middle school, in order to have iPads across all schools, we couldn't do that as a single purchase, so it was done as a lease purchase. So this is, I think, year 2 of 3 years.
Last year was year 2 of 3 for Dell, and
Right.
we're in 1 of 4 for Apple, which are the iPads.
Yeah.
This will be the final year for our Dell.
So shifting gears yet again, maintenance and operations. This is one of the other things that was included in this board item is the possible consideration of looking to put a future board item to discuss when we might go for maintenance and operations override. So we're required to report on how these dollars are spent, but it's also helpful to the board to have an understanding of how those dollars are currently used.
So in 2014, the 15% M&O override passed. It now accounts for, in our fiscal year 17 budget, just over $4.4 million in budget capacity. The pamphlet itself, I've listed some areas that we hope to maintain if this passed. They include full-day kinder, special areas, transportation routes, nursing, supervisory aides, etc. So what was the impact of that passing? Pretty significant. We were able to continue full-day kindergarten. The cost is there for you. We avoided cuts to all special area teachers at almost $1 million there. We avoided the reduction of 3 assistant principals. We avoided cuts to all supervisory aides across the district. We avoided additional custodial staff to staff who had already been cut in previous years. And we avoided an additional district-wide cut of almost $1.6 million there. In addition, that extra amount of cut, we were able to give raises throughout 15, a 1% raise, and fiscal year 16, we were able to do the 3% raise. But you can see from that amount the impact that that override makes.
So before we shift gears, just really important to understand, that what those M&O dollars from the override provide us. If that funding were to go away, obviously that would create the problems that were outlined in that portion of the presentation. And it's also important to know that when you have an M&O override, it is a 7-year override, but in year 6 it reduces by 1/3, in year 7 it reduces by an additional 1/3, and then it's completely gone come year 8. It's also important to note that you'll see some repeats in Prop 123. So as we get into the 123 dollars, you'll notice special area teachers again. But the difference is the original was to maintain the existing, and what you'll see in Proposition 123 was the addition of additional teaching staff.
So Jay, just to be really clear, year 6 is what year for us? Is it 2019?
Year 6 for us is fiscal year 2020. So if we were to go in November of 2019 and be successful, we wouldn't see a decrease, but you just have one shot at it if you go in year 19. So the question becomes, do you go sooner so that way if you don't pass it, you have another attempt?
Right. And 2019 is kind of an off year also. So, and the capital, remind me.
The capital is also 7 years, and this sometimes becomes confusing for people because they think it declines as well, but it doesn't. It's 7 years at the full rate.
Okay.
So as long as you renew it prior to the end of the 7 years, if you don't, let's say you went early for capital and you don't pass it, you continue to withdraw the capital override until it expires, or you pass a different one. If you do pass it, if it's for a different amount, then that new amount takes over the following.
Okay. Thank you.
So when we look at Prop 123, a lot of how these dollars was spent was driven by the interdependent committee process and guidance from the governing board and superintendent. So we won't go through these, but just wanted to remind that there were recommendations that came forward that drove this. Go forward to the next one. And we also had a separate recommendation for one-time funds. So as we move forward through here, go to the next one. The ongoing dollars were used for the range of employee raises that ran from 1 to 3.5%. Because we had added additional custodial support for $50,000. In fact, the ability to have the custodians here on fall break and Dr. Lewis to work with them was funded through that. So increasing special area teachers by 6 teachers was also part of that. And then you'll see benefits increase. So why is this separated out? Well, all of those prior 3 things affect the amount of benefit dollars we pay out. So that had a total cost of about $222,000. And then from the $123, in addition to whatever other carry forward we had, we also included some of those dollars as carry forward. We did not expend all of them or allocate it. Then if we go to the one-time dollars, this gets interesting because the only program that we were actually able to expend dollars for in that 17 fiscal year was Gifted. It was the first year of our new Gifted program. We did start programs under communications. The community engagement study was started and the preschool expansion was planned, but we didn't actually complete anything that was paid out during that 17 school year. So if we go forward to the 2017-18 plus, the other planned expenditures that are currently on the books for those one-time dollars include the remainder of gifted programming funds moving forward, money for communications, that community engagement study, and then the preschool expansion that was recommended last year to try to add additional preschool opportunities for families and our staff.
Very quickly, oh, perfect. I just wanted to let the record reflect that Mr. Zaragoza had to leave the meeting, so, sorry.
No. So I know that was a lot of budget information crammed into one giant quick presentation, but if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer those.
The only thing that I want to say is, although I am noticing a ton of signs all over the place for Phoenix L, for Phoenix Union, for Isaac's going for one, just my whole entire drive to work, I think even Osborne's going for one this year too. So just thinking like that, hearing what you said tonight about when it starts to decrease, I'd like to, is it appropriate to ask for a future agenda item, or should I just wait? So I think that this should.
It's noted on the agenda item, and so
Okay.
we'll be talking about possibly something like that.
Okay. Yeah, just thinking about, excuse me, since everybody else is asking this year, maybe we'll be the only ones asking next year. I doubt it.
The increase in salary, the 1.06%, is that funded by the state or is it one of their unfunded mandates?
Now, those dollars are actually being allocated by the state, but as Dr. Lewis pointed out, it's not put into our budget. It's being given as a separate funding that would need, in order for it to remain, would need to be reviewed on an annual basis.
Right, any other questions, comments, concerns?
Just to follow up on what you said, I mean, I think the timeline, if we wanted to say 2018, the board would have to make that decision like by June, I think, so.
April, you probably want to just get, so the conversation started in April, but we could
Oh,
make it
sooner than that, probably.
technically by
Yeah,
June,
yeah, right.
for the county and the state, right?
Expires in 2020.
It starts to decrease.
So we'll have time to discuss the details of what we decide to ask voters for, but I think it should definitely be a future agenda item. Thank you for your presentation and all your work.
Appreciate it.
And I don't want to know what your scores right now. You don't, trust me.
Oh, did you hear that?
I know. All right, and that brings us to the enrollment update.
So, on a meeting night, ending with enrollment just seems cruel, but we've got a 40th day enrollment update, and really we look at three key things. So if you look at this first slide, it's a 3-year tracking, and what you'll see is for 15-16 we had no projections from our demographic partners because that was the year we started our demographic studies, so we just have the actual enrollment data for 40th day. But all of the demographic projections were based on 40th day, so it makes a good comparison. So if you look at 16-17, the demographic projection was for us to land at about 6312 in enrollment. And if you look at where we actually landed for 40th day, it was 6319. So the demographers were pretty close to spot on. As we look at rolling into this year in 2017-2018, their overall projection was 6,074 students. And where we landed on 40th day enrollment was 6108, so they were within 34 there. The good news is it's 34 to the good, but it's still, when you're doing a demographic projection, they're right in the ballpark. They were fairly accurate. This is the data we used as we were doing some of our projections for where we'd end up as far as both staffing and budgeting. And You can see in the staffing status analysis, what we did is we took the day 40 numbers for this year. You'll notice that total's lower because what's removed from there is we can't utilize the students who are self-contained because it skews the ratio. But based on those students who are in those general education classrooms and the 1:26 ratios, we're pretty close to spot on throughout the system, and really net at the end of the day, and some of these are based on, being off by a half or 0.4. We're at a total of 5 teachers higher than what would have been at a 0 for that staffing for this year. And then our 2-year overall trend, and the reason we look at a 2-year overall trend is if you recall last year, we were not funded on current year because we were held harmless, so we were funded on prior year. So really, when we're doing comparisons for enrollment and we're looking at it from a budgetary perspective, we're really comparing 15-16 to 17-18. And the aggregate difference at the end of the day turned out to be about 258 students, which is spot on with where our projections were. And in fact, as mentioned earlier, we're probably in the net between those 2 years, we're 41 students better than what the demographers would have projected. And that's pretty much all the information I have for you on our enrollment trend for this year based on 48 days, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Not include preschool.
Sorry?
Does not include preschool.
Correct, it does not include preschool, and I've neglected to mention that, but we will be coming back with preschool data as well.
Questions?
I'm looking at page 2 of 4, and I'm looking at LCK, and I'm actually looking at the middle. So for 2016, 2017, they were at $4.99 at the 40th day, and then they shot up to $6.09. So they actually shot up.
No. The demographers projected they'd be at $4.99 at the 40th day.
Oh,
in fact, they were actually
okay.
at $6.09.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things the demographers were watching.
So that 110 wasn't actual students, it was the actual reality difference
Correct.
between the demographers and reality. Okay.
Yeah, because they were predicting a dip in enrollment at that school. It was higher, the dip was lower than what they had anticipated for that.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a quick question just out of curiosity, because we actually had to have a special staff meeting where I work because of a pretty significant budget shortfall because of this information. So first of all, I'd like to say that I appreciate the fact that we are, again, being proactive and getting a demographer out there to really help us try to figure out where we're going to be, because Isaac District was blindsided by the budget shortfall with this current year funding. But the interesting thing to me was that they lost mostly K3 kids, or was it K2, which is something that's never really happened before. They said typically what happens is kids start leaving middle school, and maybe they choose the K8 model, or maybe they choose a charter school or whatever. So is Creighton experiencing that same kind of dip? And does anybody, including I'm sure you're not really like talking to your demographer about what you got right and what they got wrong or whatever, but is that happening, and do you have an explanation for it?
So we're still a couple of years away from a kinder recovery based on what the demographers presented. I'd have to do some research and bring you back like what those lower grade levels look like. Anecdotally, it actually looked better than I expected, but I want to bring you actual fact rather than making a prediction about it. I really honestly couldn't say because it varies so much by region. Isaac may be experiencing something completely different to what we're experiencing. The demographic projections we have are largely impacted by that gentrification that we're seeing.
Right,
So,
yeah. Okay, yeah, I was just curious, so thank you. Any other questions, comments? Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
All right, that I think brings us to future agenda items, and I have mine all ready to go. To take a look at the possibility of an M&O budget override discussion, obviously, and vote, so if you could pass that down. Does anybody else have any future agenda items?
Move to adjourn. I just want mine to go.
There's a motion.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.